It's definitely an added bonus if the visual element of what a band or an artist is doing complements and adds to the musical side, but really it is still about the music, and obviously that's my first impression.
Sure.
And so, I mean, if there's a nice typeface used for the logo, it won't override the fact that I don't think the songs are very good. Mm-hmm. But if they're, and bands now are increasingly thinking in broader, more holistic terms about the way they're presenting themselves as an entity, and so it's becoming increasingly common that I'll see a lot more work put into videos, and also because the platform's available to people to get the word out about their band. I mean, YouTube's as valid as a specialist play on Radio 1 now, really, is in terms of the channel. So yeah, people are putting a lot more time and effort into those elements other than the music. So yeah, I often have to engage with a lot of that as well.
And just touching upon YouTube in particular, there was an A&R guy who was on it who actually said he liked to only listen to demos on YouTube because he had a very short attention span and he just liked to see something when he was listening to things.
I think it's good because if it's a live rehearsal being filmed or a gig, you can get a good, you can get a bit of an impression of what a band might look like or how they might perform. But I don't really look to YouTube and the number of views that something has got. Really, I love it if I find something that I think is good and it's had 10 views, because that means no one else has heard it. From an A&R perspective, it's quite important for me, and the same with from a management perspective when you get into business with artists, is to sort of gauge how broad their creativity is, and while it is all about the music, it's great to have an artist who's got a vision, even if it's just they know what they don't want, that they're robust in what their opinions, really, because so often I see artists who do get bulldozed by a record company creative department, and the best artists are those who have a bit of an idea of what they think is decent for them and how they should be expressed.
I think the interesting thing about the new Palantini record is my understanding is that that's a record that stylistically very much came from the artist, and in fact when it was finally delivered, the label were pretty unsure about it. They thought it was going to be a bit of a disaster, and here we are now, something like 57 weeks later.
1.5 million sales.
It's one of the biggest selling records this year and last year, and yet it was very much something that wasn't packaged and stylised.
No, the power that we have on the second album wouldn't have been able to exist commercially to that level without the springboard of the first album. Right. And that's the big difference, because a lot of people will come to me and say, oh, that Palantini record, I'm doing a similar thing, or I'd like to do that sort of vibe, and it's all, it's my vision, and I'm not going to listen to any record companies, which is what Paolo basically said on that second record.
The other famous record that, when it was delivered to record companies, they thought was a bit of a disaster and immediately downplayed the amount that it was going to sell, was OK Computer by Radiohead. And we all know where that went. Yeah. But we also had the same thing where lots of people went, oh, I've written a 6-minute song. Can't do it without the Bends, can't do it without Pablo Honey. It's getting to the place where you can actually take the risks, I suppose.
Yeah. Even the most independent artists need to know how to engage with their record companies or their publishers.
Training command.
Yeah, because there's, it's because quite often the people pressing the buttons of those record companies, they don't know how albums put together, and they don't understand the creative process entirely. So if you give them the wrong bit of information, they can suddenly freak out and think that it's a disaster, when in fact that was just the bones of what was going to become a great record. It's just reverting to what A&R used to be, which is artist and repertoire. Okay, you may crowdsource the artist, as in the face of whatever you're fronting, but you still need the person to provide the songs. And I still think that needs a creative vision.
My name's Charlene. I work for Small Town America Records. This logo, as Mark rightly said, is very key in what I'm going to talk about today in terms of branding and I suppose recognition and all of those things. So yeah, it belongs to And So I Watch From Afar, an instrumental punk rock band that we work with. What I do for the label, I'm label manager. It's a small company, it's an independent company, so we carry many different roles between myself and Andrew. One of my key roles is brand implementation. This one here is their logo. It's branded on their CDs. Branding as well, nasty word, sometimes the artists don't like to use that, but unknowingly, everything you do is essentially a brand. If you're a band and you put out a label, or you play a gig, or you book a gig and don't turn up to a gig, they ultimately affect your brand and from the start, and So I Watch From Afar, we realised that an instrumental band and the type of music that they do, and certainly the type of label that they are on, which is ours, and how we work and survive, is encouraging a very busy touring roster. We try to engage our fans and build our demographic based on the fact that the band are there and you can't really avoid them. And to this point, that's worked, and we hope it will work, because obviously live is essentially where things are going, and certainly how we sell merch, how we sell CDs, how we do all the things that allow our bands to do this as a job.
It's corporate identity.
It is, really, yeah. It is, and again, corporate again, but it's very, I hope you'll agree, subtly done. It's like brands and all of these things are all about any number of things, right? A brand is the sum of what makes your identity quite unique. But certainly now, it's like you see people with those t-shirts. Some of you might not know what this means, but the people that wear those t-shirts with that blatantly on it, and you're wearing it, and you know the people that you want to know what you're wearing, and you feel cool. It's an attitude thing.
We talked a little bit before the panel started, but I'm interested to see what sort of relationships you have with your artists, whether it's 50-50 profit share deals, as and when there is profit. Is that generally how you work?
Yeah, absolutely. Across the board, 50-50 on everything. And again, as well, we work for the artists, obviously, but we work with them. So every decision taken is one taken in tandem. Like, we all work together, and it's a very mutually respective. They respect our position on, I suppose, if you like, the business side of things and the tough decisions that need to be made. We can always communicate to the artists why it's maybe a good idea. In terms of this whole brand thing, that was never a difficult thing within So I Watch From Afar, because I think they wanted to have that solid identity. It's kind of hard. Maybe this grew out of the fact, and I can't quote that this would be, or claim that this would be true, but they don't have that recognisable frontman. You know, there are 4 members all playing different instrumentations, but you know, sometimes you've got like your Axl Rose, or you've got your Bruce Dickinson, or you've got that. Obviously, these bands have huge identities as well, but you've got that go-to person. Whereas I suppose in So I Watch From Afar terms, this is like their go-to person. It's kind of weird, but it's certainly that solid one-stop identity that maybe the band as themselves don't possess.
Did you sign a publishing deal with them as well?
They have a separate publishing deal, which again has only ever grown to support what we do, because we find a lot of the syncs that would come out of the publishing deal would sync up with skater brands and like surfing brands and all that kind of urban sports brands, which again I feel that this lends itself quite. You could see that on, you know, like a Vans type thing and not let it feel out of place. So that's complemented what we do, and certainly the growth of the band.
History of rock music has been like the likes of Johnny Cash going way back to Elvis, and other bands like the Beatles. They continually went to A&R people and were turned away. Is that still a common occurrence?
But even more than that, I think that if I was just given 2 minutes of any of the artists I've ended up managing completely cold, I'd probably turn them all down. It's context is everything.
Yeah.
And not, I mean, the thing that I particularly hate about the moment, and I hope that the tide will turn back, is that the story has become much more important than the music. There was an article in Word magazine this month which talks about the New Atlantic signing the girl Rumour, who's probably going to have a #1 album on November the something, we can tell already, thanks to the way the record industry works. She has a really interesting backstory. Elvis Perkins, the American singer, son of the actor. If there's a great story, then they'll listen to it, not vice versa.
Let me ask you about underground music. I know that Earache and a couple of underground metal labels and things like that, they seem to have done away with their A&R departments in an active role, and they seem to have fan A&R people who will hype a band to them, and once a band gets hyped to a certain level, then the A&R will look into it. Is that specific to underground music, or?
Well, I think it's a little bit to do with the critical mass kind of thing you were talking about earlier. It's the fact that because record companies don't see, in the main, not always, their job as being development anymore. It's like the fans almost are doing the development for them. They're going, right, we now think this is brilliant. We're kind of handed over at the finishing line, as you talked about earlier. So I think it happens at all levels. It's you know, the fans are there. There's a lot more ways of tracking artists than there ever used to be. Those of us who are getting on a bit, remember, we'll look for that sort of tiny little column inch in page 23 of sounds in the 80s or the 70s or whenever it might have been, and now you just have to type in Google. I mean, it's so different. So there is that kind of part of it's probably quite good news because there's a degree of democratisation, but part of it I think is is kind of depressing because it's lowest common denominator.